first thing I noticed when I reached the top of the fire tower was that the trapdoor was already open. It swayed slightly in the evening wind, tapping once against the wooden floor before settling. I stopped on the last rung, staring up into the cab. The ranger who dropped me off had left an hour earlier, bouncing down the dirt service road and promising I'd settle in fast. He'd also told me the tower had been empty for weeks, but someone had left the hatch open. I climbed the rest of the way and pulled myself inside. The tower overlooked miles of forest, dark pines rolling over the mountains in every direction. Sunset painted the horizon in dull orange and fading purple. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, the room felt used. One of the swivel chairs sat angled toward the windows instead of tucked under the desk. A thermos rested beside the radio, and near the map table sat a ceramic coffee mug, half full. I walked over and touched it. Still warm. I frowned and looked around again. The cab was simple. Radio console, weather monitor, binoculars, a narrow cot, and shelves stocked with emergency supplies. Everything looked orderly, but not abandoned. On the desk sat the station logbook. I opened it, expecting old entries from earlier in the season. Instead, I found fresh handwriting logged for today. 6 p.m. Visibility clear. 6:41 p.m. Wind shifting east. 7. 12 p.m. Bird activity reduced. 8:13 p.m. Movement in tree line. I checked my watch. 7:46 p.m. I stared at the page. The date at the top matched today, my first shift. The entries were written neatly, in dark ink, steady and deliberate. I crossed to the western window and scanned the forest below. The slope dropped away into dense pines, shadows pooling between trunks. No smoke, no people, no movement. Just trees. I stood there for a moment longer, then turned back toward the desk. The logbook was still open. Except there was a new line written beneath the others. 7:48 p.m. Wind stopped. As if on cue, the faint breeze brushing the tower frame suddenly died. The silence settled fast and heavy around the cab. I stared at the new entry, my pulse picking up. No one else was up here. I hadn't heard footsteps, no vehicle on the road below, no voice on the radio. I stepped closer to the desk. The ink looked fresh. I swallowed and looked back toward the windows. The forest remained still, darker now as the sun dropped behind the ridge. The quiet pressed in harder than before. Behind me, the logbook sat open. I glanced back again. Another line had appeared. 7:52 p.m. He checked the window again. I felt a cold tightness settle in my chest. Slowly, I walked to the door and opened it, leaning out onto the narrow platform. The metal stairs spiraled down the tower, disappearing into the darkening trees below. No one climbing, no one at the base. Just forest and deepening shadow. I stepped back inside and shut the door, the latch clicking louder than it should have. When I turned around, the logbook had changed again. 8:13 p.m. Movement in tree line below western slope. The same entry I'd seen earlier, now written again. I moved to the western windows. At first, I saw nothing. Then, far below, between two lines of trees, something shifted. A slow movement, subtle, like someone stepping between trunks. I leaned forward, trying to focus. The shape disappeared. The forest returned to stillness. Behind me, the tower creaked softly. Then, faintly from somewhere below, metal groaned on the stairs, like weight shifting. like someone beginning to climb. I stood near the doorway listening. The metal stairs wrapped around the tower in a long spiral, and normally you could hear someone climbing from far below. Footsteps carried easily through the structure, but this had only been one sound. One slow creak, then silence. I leaned out over the platform, gripping the frame. The forest below had darkened, the last light fading behind the ridge. The base of the tower was already swallowed in shadow. No movement. No one climbing. I stepped back inside and shut the door, the latch clicking louder than expected. The quiet inside the cab felt heavier now. The logbook sat open on the desk. A new line had appeared. 8:21 p.m. He heard the stairs. I felt a chill crawl up my arms. I hadn't taken my eyes off the room long enough for anyone to enter. No pen lay nearby. No explanation made sense. The radio crackled suddenly. I turned toward it, my heart jumping. Static filled the speaker, low and uneven. I stepped closer and adjusted the volume. "Tower 12 radio check," I said. The static shifted. For a moment I thought I heard something beneath it. A faint sound, like breathing. Then the radio went silent again. I stared at it for a few seconds before turning back toward the windows. The moon had begun rising above the eastern ridge, casting a pale glow across the tops of the trees. That's when I noticed the light. Far out along the western slope, something flickered between the trees. Dim, steady, moving slowly. I leaned closer to the glass. The light appeared again, then disappeared behind a line of pines. It didn't look like a flashlight. Too faint, too steady. Someone walking out there? The ranger had told me no one worked this section overnight. The light flickered once more, then vanished. I waited, scanning the slope, but nothing returned. Behind me, the logbook pages shifted slightly. I turned. Another entry had appeared. 8:34 p.m. Light observed on western slope. My stomach tightened. I hadn't written it. I stepped closer, staring at the fresh ink. The letters looked deliberate, steady. The tower creaked softly. Wind brushed the windows for a moment, then stopped. The silence that followed felt unnatural. I looked back down at the book. 8:36 p.m. Wind stopped. I felt my pulse quicken. The entries weren't just appearing, they were describing things as they happened, or before. I checked my watch. 8:37 p.m. I flipped back through the pages, scanning earlier entries. Most looked normal, weather reports, visibility checks. Then I found a section written in the same handwriting. 2:13 a.m. Movement below tower. 2:18 a.m. Stairs creaking. 2:24 a.m. Still climbing. I frowned. Those times hadn't happened yet. I turned back to the current page. At the bottom, a new line had appeared. 2:13 a.m. Climbing begins. I stared at it. Outside, the forest remained still. The tower creaked again. Then, faintly, from somewhere far below, metal groaned on the stairs. Longer this time, like weight shifting. Like someone beginning to climb. The sound came again. A slow metallic groan, followed by the faint vibration of weight shifting against the tower frame. I froze, listening. This time it didn't stop right away. Another creak followed, then another. Someone was climbing. I moved toward the door, each step careful and quiet. My hand hovered over the latch before I slowly pulled it open and leaned out. The spiral staircase curved downward into darkness. The moonlight barely reached the lower sections, leaving most of the tower swallowed in shadow. I listened. Nothing. The sound had stopped again. I leaned farther out, scanning the lower landings. The tower stretched down through the trees, the metal platforms stacked one beneath another. No movement. No one there. I stepped back inside and shut the door, trying to steady my breathing. The quiet pressed in around me again, thicker now. The logbook sat open. A new entry had appeared. 2:16 a.m. He checked the stairs. I stared at it, my stomach tightening. The time hadn't even happened yet. I turned away from the desk and walked slowly around the cab, checking the corners, the cot, the shelves. Everything remained empty. The radio sat silent. The forest outside, motionless. Then something caught my eye near the back wall. A jacket hung from one of the hooks beside the supply shelf. I hadn't noticed it before. It was an old Ranger-style coat, faded green with worn elbows. I stepped closer and touched the sleeve. Cold, stiff from being left too long. A name tag was stitched above the pocket. Miller. I frowned. The ranger who dropped me off had mentioned the previous watcher only briefly. Guy named Miller, left early this season, he'd said. Didn't say much when he went. But if Miller had left weeks ago, why was his jacket still here? I glanced back toward the desk. Another line had appeared in the logbook. 2:18 a.m. He found the jacket. A chill spread through my chest. The radio crackled. I turned quickly toward it. Static filled the speaker, louder this time. I stepped closer, leaning in. Then a voice pushed faintly through the noise. "You're early tonight." The words were quiet, distorted but unmistakable. I grabbed the radio microphone. "Tower 12 responding, identify yourself." Only static answered, then silence. I slowly lowered the microphone, my pulse pounding harder now. I moved toward the western windows again, scanning the forest below. The moonlight cast pale silver across the treetops, leaving the ground beneath dark and uneven. That's when I saw it. A shape at the base of the tower. Someone standing near the lowest platform, motionless, looking up. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to make out details. The figure stood partially in shadow, tall and still, its outline just visible between the tower supports. It didn't move, didn't shift, just stood there, watching. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Behind me, the logbook pages shifted softly. I turned. 2:24 a.m., standing below 2:26 a.m., still watching. My mouth felt dry. When I turned back to the window, the figure had moved. It stepped forward slowly, then reached for the stairs. The metal groaned as weight settled onto the first step. I watched, frozen, as the figure began climbing. Slow, deliberate, one step at a time. The tower creaked beneath the movement. The shape climbed past the first landing, then the second. I stepped back from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps continued, slow, measured, closer. Behind me, the logbook updated again. 2:31 a.m., halfway up. The metal stairs groaned again outside the cab. The footsteps stopped, right beneath the trapdoor. Silence filled the tower. Then, slowly, the hatch handle began to turn. The handle stopped halfway. It twitched once, then slowly returned to its original position. I didn't breathe. For several seconds, nothing happened. The tower sat completely still, the silence pressing in around me. Then the footsteps began again. Not upward, downward. The metal stairs groaned softly as the weight retreated, one slow step at a time. I stood, frozen, listening as the sound moved farther and farther away. After a minute, it was gone. I waited longer than I meant to before finally stepping forward and opening the hatch. I leaned out carefully, scanning the landings below. Empty. The staircase spiraled down into darkness, motionless again. I pulled back inside and shut the hatch, my hands unsteady now. The logbook pages shifted. 2:34 a.m. He didn't open it. 2:36 a.m. It went back down. I stared at the entries, my pulse still racing. I flipped back through the logbook again, turning pages faster this time. The same handwriting filled more of the book than I'd realized. Entire sections written in the same steady ink. Different dates, different watchers, but the same pattern. 2:13 a.m. Movement below. 2:18 a.m. Climbing begins. 2:31 a.m. Stops at hatch. Page after page, I kept flipping. Names appeared in the margins occasionally, short notes written beside the entries. Third night, still climbing. Radio voice sounds familiar. Don't open the hatch. My chest tightened as I realized the notes weren't written by the same person. The handwriting changed slightly with each one. Different watchers. Same experience. I turned another page. A final note at the bottom. He never leaves. I slowly looked up from the book. The radio crackled again. I turned toward it, my stomach tightening. Static filled the speaker, then a voice pushed through, clearer this time. Don't open the hatch. I froze. The voice sounded familiar, too familiar. It took a second before I realized why. It sounded like me. The radio fell silent again. I stepped back slowly, my mind racing. I glanced toward the door, then back to the logbook. A new line appeared. 2:47 a.m. He heard his own voice. I swallowed hard. Outside, the forest remained still, pale under the moonlight. I stepped toward the windows again, scanning the base of the tower. At first, I didn't see anything. Then movement. The figure had returned, standing at the bottom of the stairs again, waiting. I watched as it stepped forward once more. The metal groaned as it began climbing again, slow, deliberate. The footsteps echoed up the tower, closer, closer. I backed away from the hatch, my pulse hammering in my chest. The steps reached the final landing. Stopped. Silence filled the cab. Then the handle moved again. This time it turned slightly farther. I held my breath. The hatch rattled softly, then stopped. The footsteps retreated again, descending into the darkness below. I exhaled slowly, my hands shaking now. Behind me, the logbook updated. 2:58 a.m. It's learning. I stared at the words. The radio crackled softly one more time, then silence returned. I looked down at the logbook again. A final entry appeared at the bottom of the page. 7:12 a.m. Replacement arrives. I frowned. Morning hadn't come yet. I flipped the page. The next day's date was already written, and beneath it, 7:18 p.m. New watcher arrived. 7:46 p.m. He found the logbook. 8:13 p.m. Movement below tower. My stomach dropped. It was tonight. The page had already been written. Then slowly one final line appeared. 2:13 a.m. He stays. From somewhere below, the metal stairs creaked again. I didn't look at the stairs this time. I just stood there staring at the final entry. 2:13 a.m. He stays. The words sat at the bottom of the page, still fresh, the ink catching the pale glow of the overhead light. My pulse pounded in my ears as the tower creaked softly beneath me. Another sound rose from below. Slow footsteps. Climbing again. But weaker this time, slower. Like the weight on the stairs wasn't as solid as before. I backed away from the hatch, my hands trembling. The footsteps reached the final landing and stopped. The handle didn't move. Instead, the metal platform outside groaned softly, like someone standing there, waiting. I didn't open it. Minutes passed. Eventually, the sound faded. The weight lifted. The stairs fell silent again. I didn't move for a long time after that. Sometime later, the sky began to lighten beyond the eastern ridge. The forest slowly returned to view, shadows giving way to dull morning gray. The night felt like it loosened its grip on the tower. I checked the logbook. No new entries, just the same final line. 2:13 a.m. He stays. At 7:05 a.m., I heard a vehicle far below on the service road. The sound carried faintly through the trees, growing louder as it approached. Relief washed over me. A few minutes later, I saw the ranger's truck pull into the clearing at the base of the tower. I grabbed my bag, ready to leave. The radio crackled. "How was your first night?" the ranger's voice asked. I hesitated before answering. "Quiet," I said finally. A pause. "That's good," he replied. I slung my bag over my shoulder and stepped toward the hatch, then stopped. Something pulled me back toward the desk. The logbook. I looked down. A new entry had appeared. 7:11 a.m. He made it through the night. I stared at the words. Then another line appeared beneath it. 7:12 a.m. He's leaving. My chest tightened. I moved quickly to the hatch and opened it. The morning air felt cool and real against my face as I stepped onto the platform. The ranger stood below, looking up. I began climbing down. Halfway to the bottom, I stopped. Something made me glance toward the tree line. A figure stood just beyond the clearing, motionless, watching the tower. I felt a cold chill spread through me. The ranger noticed me pause. "Everything all right?" he called. "Yeah," I said, forcing myself to keep climbing. When I reached the ground, I looked again. The figure was gone. The ranger nodded toward the tower. "You get settled in okay?" "Yeah," I said quietly. He handed me a clipboard. "Just sign off your first shift." I took it. My name was already written at the top. Below it, a second line caught my eye. Previous watcher, Miller. Replacement, my name. My stomach tightened. I handed the clipboard back and climbed into the truck. As we pulled away, I looked back one last time. The tower stood alone above the trees, still, silent, watching. That's when the radio on the dashboard crackled softly. Not the ranger's unit. The tower frequency. A faint voice pushed through the static. "He hasn't noticed me yet." I slowly turned toward the tower. For just a moment, I thought I saw movement near the top window, like someone standing inside, watching the road as we drove away, watching me leave. Watching and waiting. And as the tower disappeared behind the ridge, I realized something that made my stomach drop. I had never seen Miller leave. If you enjoyed tonight's story, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Campfire Horror Stories. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Because out there, in the quiet places, Fire towers still stand above miles of empty forest, watching, waiting. And sometimes, the person assigned to watch the woods isn't the only one up there. If you were alone in that tower, would you open the hatch? Let me know in the comments. And as always, lock your doors, check the windows, and don't look too long into the trees, because something might be looking back. I'll see you in the next Campfire horror story.